Make sure we have it in the right spot. All right, good, excellent. I will adjust the camera. Hope everybody's having a great week. You are probably getting ready for your kids to start school again. If you have kids, if you work for the school board, you're probably getting ready to go back to work if you did not work in the summer. I hope everybody had a great summer. For the month of August, we actually are getting ready to start a new theme. We're going to focus on the mindset of a winner. So, a winner's mindset. Hey, Mom, what we are going to look at over the next month, or at least the next like 4 or 5 episodes, we're going to talk about just some characteristics, some maybe misconceptions, just some overall thoughts and ideas that you find within winners. These winners could be within corporate America, it could be within families, it could be within sports that we more traditionally think of. But what is it that they have that we can emulate? Some of the traits that maybe they have learned or practiced over time. And we will even look to answer that question. Is a winner created? Is it bred? Is it environment? Is it genetics and DNA? We look to explore all of that. There's tons of studies and research on that. And so we'll get into that as well. For the first episode, we're actually going to talk about confidence. Confidence, I believe, is the linchpin when you really are trying to figure out what winners have that maybe others don't. Because confidence, when you really think about it, it's the idea that what I'm doing, I believe I'm going to get the outcome that I want. And even if you don't exactly get that outcome, you're fine with that because you know you did everything possible to put yourself in the best position to win. And you'll see that when winners have that kind of keeps them going. Like Michael Jordan, I think he has a quote where he talks about like how many times he's missed the last second jumpers, how many times he has missed in general, and just kind of all the failures that he has had in his life. But that is why he is a success, because once he fails, he got back up, or it motivated him to pursue more like practice, more effort, more of his craft, where maybe he got different coaches and things like that. So it really comes down to a lot of the mind, but we're going to just focus specifically on confidence. And we know that he had a ton of it. And most athletes, when they play at that level, they all have confidence as well. Hey, hun. When we're looking at the 5 characteristics, the first one we're going to talk about, because there really are like dozens, if not hundreds of them, when you really think about it, because there's a lot of situational differences that creates certain successful stories here and certain successful stories there. But we're really going to just focus on the very minute ones that have to do with our particular life, and at least mine. And so if there's any that you have, you can definitely put them in the chat, any that you're interested in. But I'm going to start with at least the 5 that resonate with me. Number 1 is just not to hedge your success. And what I mean by that is don't plan for failure. Now, there are tons of people that will say you should be prepared for anything, and I can appreciate that. And I understand the value of being prepared for any and everything. But I also understand that whenever you create in your mind as far as this is what's going to happen, this is what I'm mentally preparing for, your body starts to act that way. And there's this old saying that in like NASCAR driving, they tell them not to look at the wall because they're going to drive into the wall. Playing baseball through college, they say where your foot is lined up, that is where your arm's going to go, and that's where the ball's going to go. You cannot look to first and throw to home with any sort of strength or velocity. And so what I'm saying is if you spend a significant amount of time planning for your failure, then don't be surprised that you're enacting these plans, because that is where you're looking. That is the direction that you're going. If you have this naivete where you're like, I'm going to crush it, this is going to work, and you are doing everything possible to be successful, you will find, hey, Heather, oh, hey, RJ, you will find that what ends up happening, if you have taken the time to plan to be successful, that most likely that's going to happen. When you give yourself a safety blanket, unfortunately, we sometimes find ourselves using it, right? Everybody who procrastinates, when do you procrastinate to? Whatever the deadline is. If you gave yourself a shorter deadline, would you probably get the work done in a short amount of time? Well, yeah, if it was reasonable, right? We're not talking about losing 5 pounds per week, but we're just saying that instead of giving myself 3 months to lose 5 pounds, maybe I gave myself 2 months. And you'll find that you'll hit whatever those marks are. That when we procrastinate, it's just sort of a natural thing that whatever the amount of space we allow ourselves, we fill it up. So what I'm saying is go ahead and fill up with the success of preparation for whatever it is that you set to create in your life. And when you don't have the safety blanket, you find yourself working just a little bit harder. And I'm not saying that that works for everybody, but I will say that that is one that I find commonly, and as far as working with me and within a lot of other risk takers that you'll find within corporate America, that when they have their successes, they generally are planning to succeed. They are not planning to fail. Number two is you don't feel the need to compete with others. When we find that when we find that we're looking at other people, it sometimes can be deflating on one end, because we're like, man, look how great they're doing, and I'm only doing like half of that. Or wow, they have all of this going on for them, and they're juggling so many hats, and I'm barely keeping my head above water with like this one or two things. But when you really get down to it, when you're competing against other people, I find more often than not, you're stunting your own growth. And the reason I say that is in track, when I was like in middle school and running track, before I found out that it was just running all the time, and I was like running hurdles, so I thought that that was not quite running, but it was really still running. When you run in track, they tell you all the time, run against the clock. You're not running against the person next to you. You are always running against the clock. And what they mean by running against the clock is you're running against your personal best. And the reason that matters in track is because, unlike a lot of other sports where you end up having the two teams and whoever wins goes to the national championship or the state championship, in track, whoever has the best like 10 times in that event goes to states. So you could be on a very slow track where everybody is very slow and you beat them, but because your time isn't as best as the top 10, you don't get to go to states. So they tell you to race against the clock. You should never look and say, well, I'm like 3 laps ahead of everyone else, so I'm going to slow down, because you really don't know. You have no idea how fast someone else is going, and they may lose in their meet, but they still have one of the 10 best times, so they go to states and you don't. And that's always resonated with me, because it really is important that when we're trying to figure out if we're being successful or not, we should really look at how am I doing against my own personal best, my own personal previous best, or my own personal expectations for myself. It really doesn't matter how good or how bad anyone else is doing. Sure, it's nice to have some research, some benchmarks, because that helps you to realize whether your goals are realistic. But outside of that, I would say don't even get stuck into comparing yourself to other people. One, we really don't know how great or bad they're doing, but I mean, two, it's just, who cares? I mean, right? Like, who cares? Number three, we have confident people do not find the need to intimidate other people. I'm sure you can all think of a story where someone who pretends to be confident is really not, because bullies, they oftentimes say bullies have like self-confidence issues. And I find that people who want the tallest building, and they only want the tallest building by tearing down all the other buildings instead of building the tallest one, that person lacks confidence. They do not believe they have the ability to do what you did. So they try to tear down your success and put you underneath them. And so twofold. One is, if someone does that, they are self-destructive. Do not allow them to destruct any part of your life. Go ahead and remove yourself from that situation. Number two, do not believe the hype where there's these stories of these like CEOs and how successful they are, and they're just flat out jerks. Like, they curse everybody out, they're really mean, and they make it seem like it's like cool to be mean. I'm thinking of like the Simon Cowells and the American Idol, or I'm even thinking of Mr. Wonderful in the Shark Tank, right? Where that's like a cool thing to be like that guy. It really isn't. Like, they come off as confidence, but it's really not confidence. Generally speaking, they're just creating ratings. They're just trying to be entertaining. It doesn't really work when everybody's like super nice to the contestants, so you kind of have to do that. But when people bring that into the real world, you find that they just lack confidence, and it's their own self-esteem issues, and they're projecting that on you. So don't believe the hype and think that that is what confident people do. It's not. That is what people who lack confidence do. Number four is you easily move off from your accomplishments. And this is important in the sense that do not allow the stories that you read about yourself, either great stories or bad stories, especially in the social media world, right? Like when I was told this as a kid, it was in the context of me playing baseball, where it was like, don't read the stories about how great you did in last night's game, and then you believe that story, right? You are getting your confidence from that external resource. Because next week, if you have a bad game and you go read the same story and they're talking bad about you, Because your confidence is from that external resource, they have taken it from you. You should put your confidence in a position where it cannot be taken from you. It is from within you, and external circumstances do not affect it. And I often think of like the waters and the waves when like Peter was trying to walk on the water, and he was doing great when his confidence was kind of like internal, when he was just like eye to eye looking at Jesus. But it faded when he started looking at the external things around him. Because externally, I'm sure he probably looked at some of the other disciples in the boat, and they're looking at him like, "What are you doing, Peter?" He probably looked at the water, and then he remembered like, "Yeah, this water is really choppy." But if he just stayed kind of within himself, he would have been fine. And that is often true for us as well. If your confidence is internal, and it would be like, I don't know the technical term, but it's kind of like accomplished motivated, where you are motivated by your own ability to achieve certain outcomes. It has little to do with whether people throw a parade for you when you do it. It has little to do whether you get like awards and other recognition. Like those things are nice. But there's even some studies that compare the idea of there was, how did the study go? The study basically gave one group of people money. They're like, if you achieve this outcome, we'll give everybody like $1,000. And those people did pretty good. But then on the other end, what they did was they said, okay, we're just going to have like a leaderboard. And if you, and whatever your results are, we're going to put them on that board. And whether you like the results or not, they're going to be on that board. And they found that the group that, and they found that when people have external motivations, money and other accolades, that it's not as effective as just the idea that there will be a leaderboard, right? Because that is your personal perception of yourself. That is how you see yourself. And when you look at the board, you're like, I see myself higher than that. And that is enough motivation, more motivation would be a better phrase, for you to create a certain outcome. And so I encourage you to kind of do some of that with yourself, right? It's called like social accountability. If you put whatever your goals are kind of within a Facebook group, or you share it with your friends and stuff like that, you find that you are accountable to those people that you have spoken to, and it works better because that accountability is driven by the fact of your own internal perception of yourself, and that you want to maintain that. So however you see yourself, if you see that there's a situation where you can share with someone who sees you that way, and then then you're motivated by the desire to maintain that perception of yourself. Like you don't want to let yourself down. And that's the best way to really go about that. And then also when you think about the idea, it's like, act like you've been there before, right? Like you have to be okay with kind of moving off from your successes and moving on, getting back to work, because you find out that people who cannot act like they've been there before, where they're throwing like mini parades and it's like a big deal for them just to make it to the next round, like those Cinderella teams and the Sweet 16s, it usually works where they end up spending all their emotional energy and then they lose in the next round. They won, it was unexpected, they were super excited, they like stormed the field, everybody felt good, but because they didn't act like they've been there before, they spent all of it, and then they end up getting beat the next round. So I just don't want you to put yourself in that situation. And last but not least is self-awareness. And I am sure I do not speak alone when I say that there is a lot of common sense that is not so common anymore. But the idea of self-awareness is just being okay with taking responsibility for your actions. A confident person will always accept blame, even if it's not completely theirs, and they have no problem giving praise. When you find that someone has a confidence deficit, it's the opposite. They have so many problems sharing credit, and they have no problem pointing the fingers. You don't want to be that person, because what ends up happening, you end up finding out that people who have an inability to, people who lack a self-awareness, that it really comes down to the way that they perceive failure. They see failure as a indication that they suck at something. And as a result, they cannot admit that they failed, because that means that they're admitting that they have a personal flaw. But if you're a confident person, then you maybe will say, I didn't plan as well as I should have. I took the wrong route. I used the wrong equipment, right? It's not that you as a person have an issue. It's that maybe you just didn't take the best approach towards something. Maybe it was some things that were out of your circumstances. Maybe you feel like, you know what, I'll need to choose a better partner next time. This person wasn't as trustworthy and reliable as I hoped that they would have been. Whatever it is, you look at each failure as an opportunity to learn. And you'll find that people who have a high self-awareness and a high confidence, they look at failure that way, that it is not an indication that they as a person are like having problems. It's just that either their preparation, what they knew, some of the assumptions that they made, or people that they worked with, that it was something that they learned and they will make better for next time. But it is not an issue that they have with admitting, hey, you know what? I dropped the ball. I thought it was a 3-day process, but it's really a 5-day. We worked all night, but we didn't make it, right? Versus someone else that's pointing all the blame. They're like, oh, you just didn't give us anything to work with, and your demands are unreasonable, and blah 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 blah. Because I'm sure we've all dealt with people like that, where it's really hard to communicate with people who have no self-awareness, and as a result, they end up not growing because they only surround themselves with people who confirm that belief, and then they push away anybody who's honest with them, and then you end up being surrounded by a bunch of yes people, which is a really bad spot to be in. And that is it. So a quick recap, just to make sure we're all on the same page. When you are trying to create that confidence stool, the confidence pillar of your winner mindset, number one is you want to number one is you don't want to hedge against your success. You want to plan for success, not planning for failure. Number two is you don't feel the need to compete with others. You race against the clock. It's just against your personal best. Number three is you're not trying to intimidate others. You do not need to bully, and you have no problem building up your own empire. You don't want to tear down other people's. Number four is you'll easily move off of your accomplishments because number one, you don't want to be too high or too low. You want to stay even keeled. And number two, you want to act like you've been there before. You are not surprised by your successes. You put in a lot of work and the results are going to come. And number five, you have a high self-awareness. You have no problem admitting when you're wrong, and you definitely don't have a problem giving credit to other people. And next week we'll continue in this. We'll have like integrity, like perseverance coming up when we talk about other pillars of a winner's mindset. If you have not seen, I had set my goal to touch 100 lives positively. And the way we're going to accomplish that is I'm going to give out free 20-minute coaching calls. If you have not already had one, you just go to forecasthope.com and you will see where you can just click it at the very top. It's at the very top if you go to forecasthope.com. And I always thank you guys for your time. Continue blessings, and I'll see you again next week.